So for this very interesting discussion, I'd like to invite, of course, Mr. Ruman, as well Mr. John Baird, the Vice President at Raytheon Poland Programs. Mr. Howard Bromberg, Vice President, Air Defense Lockheed Martin Corporation. Sveinnung Chief Systems Engineer, Network Enabled Capabilities, Business Development Manager at Kongsberg. And my humble self, who will be filling in for our sick colleague. Gentlemen, oh, sorry. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Hello. Thank you very much for joining me here today. We have 30 minutes for our panel, so maybe I'll start off with one general question and then go on with some specific ones. I'm really hoping for this to be an involved discussion, so if you feel there's something really important about the future battlefields that you'd like to mention, or if anyone from the audience would like to add or ask anything or pitch in, please feel free. So I think everyone in Poland is really asking themselves, at least I am, what will be Russia's next move? As far as the battlefield goes. We've seen the future of the battlefield in Ukraine with the little green man. How will this evolve on the high technology level in the coming years? What do you see the dangers to Polish air defense or Polish special forces, all those kinds of issues in the next 5 to 10 years? Sorry?
So thanks for that question. Thanks for having us here today. I can't speak specifically to your specific question. Let me speak in general terms more about future threats, because I think it's important for everyone to understand about future threats. Future threats, we have to be informed by the past, and we have to keep an eye towards the future. I think one thing that we all see is all the threats are getting more and more complex as we look across the globe, wherever you look. Complex threats, and you mentioned air missile defense, take a wide range, particularly in the missile category, whether it be ballistic, whether it be cruise, whether it be short-range missiles, whether it be rockets, artillery, and also aircraft. And this is a very complex threat, and it's also synchronized with other activities on the battlefield, from electronic warfare to other capabilities. So the first thing I think you have to look at is you have to look at a network-centric approach. Because I think all of us understand that from the previous gentleman's discussion, networking is very important. You have to maximize your capabilities of your sensors and your shooters across the battlefield. And you need open architectures, and you need to be innovative. And this is what, in our industry, in our particular company, that's what how we're approaching this. It's a very innovative approach with very open architectures. As you'll see, and everybody knows, as we look at our medium extended air defense system, this is what we've prided ourselves on in terms of an open architecture and networking approaching. Without this, I think you tie yourself to the past too much. You have to bring this together and maximize the capabilities.
I'll steal your microphone for a second. Mr. Baird, would you like to pitch in here?
Sure, I'd absolutely like to add to that, and thank you for the comments, and I agree with my colleague. It is a very complex environment, and it evolves into more complexity. It's also evolving into multi-dimensional and also layered. So if you look at the threats of the future, there's not just one area you have to focus on. You have to focus on a balanced approach. That is, I agree, and networked and integrated together, but it's also a layered approach so that you have a balanced defensive strategy, so that any one area that gets attacked, you have a balanced approach to that so you can defend against multi-dimensional activity. You also have to balance that with resources in a good investment strategy, which I think the comments of the last two speakers about economic security and development and also defensive capability security environment add to that equation, because there's always a cost equation that flows into this from how much does the adversary spend versus you spend to balance that equation so that you can have that layered and multidimensional approach.
Sorry, my microphone's still not working, so I'll steal yours again. Mr. Alne, we've heard from our colleagues from the States. They represent respectively Medes and Patriot. You represent Kongsberg, which first of all brings to mind the NASAMS system. How NASAMS responds to the threats of the future?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. I would like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to being here and participate in this discussion. What strikes us about the future battlefield is, of course, that it's always very difficult to predict. But one fair prediction is that we will see more and more a peer-to-peer situation on the battlefield. And as was mentioned by my good colleagues here, we will see a more and more complex threat and more concerted and complex offense against the ground-based air defense. And the natural question then is how will our systems today and how they evolve be able to respond to that kind of a very complex threat. And I think what is very important is to look for systems that have proven evolution already and to look for how they are prepared for later technology insertion in order to meet this sometimes very unpredictable threat. So I think that when it comes to technologies, for example, it's quite clear that network enabling is very important, realizing that one single type of sensor is not doing the trick and one single type of effector is not doing the trick, but rather a smart and well-matched combination into an open architecture solution. So that would be my reaction to that question. Thank you.
Thank you. I think one common topic that we've heard from each of the gentlemen who spoke is the network approach and the necessity to create a form of a network to defend ourselves from the future threats. This brings to mind the cybersecurity. And Mr. Ruman, can you tell us a little more from your perspective how you see the threats of the future? What's the difference between the cyber threats or the traditional threats, and what's your take on this?
So first, adding to what other speakers said, I would like to also add that we in Polish Armaments Group also work on the territorial defense. And I think this is a very important thing for the future security with respect to the hybrid war and the so-called little green man. The territorial defense, which is right there at the border and it is able to react within hours because these are local people, is a very important response to the threats of the hybrid warfare. And when it comes to cybersecurity, I think the difficult part is that even though the NATO summit in Warsaw recognized cyber as a domain of potential war, we still don't know what are the borders between the state of peace and the state of war when it comes to cyber. So when to say that some country has been attacked. We have seen plenty of cyber attacks on multiple NATO countries, including US, but never the war has been declared. So I think this is one of the challenges for the future, to somehow put the borders in this area to be able to react and defend ourselves and put some clear lines between the state of peace and war.
Thank you, Mr. Ruman. Can you hear me? No. Sorry, one more time. Okay. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Could I add to that too?
Oh, sure, Mr. Baird, of course.
So there's another aspect of cyber. All of us have been talking predominantly about defense systems and defense networks. Cyber transcends that. So there's cyber defense in the defense equipment world, but cyber goes into the commercial world, into the financial systems, infrastructure system. So the multidimensional part of cyber is how do you protect all of the assets that a potential foe could attack? So the dimensional aspect is going into the civil world. which is a little different complexity, which I think you're hinting at, is how do we deal with those actions and how do we deal with those differently than just a military attack?
Great, thank you. If we don't have any questions, I'd like to shift the gears a little bit, but still focus on the future battlefield. We're used to seeing a lot of competition between your companies, especially in the Polish market. The Wisła and the NAREW programs have been long-standing, and we've seen a lot of competition here. But at the same time, as Mr. Ruman mentioned, there's the question of NATO alliance and how we collectively defend ourselves. And we just heard that NASAMS has been chosen for Lithuania. We know that Germany is in advanced talks about MEADS, and Patriot is the front runner here in Poland, and still on the German, of course, armed forces. So how do you see your products or your systems cooperating with each other, talking with each other within NATO in the future, and how will that address the future threats that NATO and Poland are facing?
That's a really good question, and let me just summarize. I think these are very important discussions for Poland, because it's about the future of Poland's defense, but it's also about the future of the defense within NATO. So I think when you move back from the industry perspective for just 1 second and talk about availability of information and ensuring that everybody has a full information to go forward so they can make the best decision for their own national equities, I think that's what's really important. And so, as you brought the subject up, clearly within our position, or within the MEADS positions, we've clearly offered an open architecture that allows people to join. And this is how NATO can become interoperable. It's not a stovepipe system. It's a very open system. It has multiple years of development already done, and it looks to the future. And I think when you look at NATO, and going back to your previous question, I think you have to look to the future, because you can't get chained to the past. If you get chained to the past too much, you won't see the future clearly, and we clearly will sometimes get the future wrong. I think everybody knows you don't always get it right, no matter who you are. But this is about an open and transparent process, so the best decisions can be made. We believe that in the MEADS system, because it was developed in Europe, it fits the European environment very well. And I think that's been seen with the German selection of their TLVS program, which is based upon MEADS. So I think that's very important as we go forward, to look at all the capabilities. You have to look, when you look at the future threats, you have to look not only in terms of the domains that were already mentioned, but you also have to look at the 360-degree capability that's available today that's already been tested and proven. So I think you have to go and look at what's available today, look at that, and have all the information on the table so a proper decision can be made for the best interest of whatever that national equities are.
Mr. Baird, I'm sure you want to...
Oh, obviously. You know, there's two things I'll add to that is you mentioned that we are all competitors, but we also partner in many different ways. So we have this term that I like to use as competimates. So we partner sometimes, compete sometimes. That brings the best of industry to the problems to solve challenges in defense and other areas. So, you know, our partners in Lockheed are also part of Patriot in the MSC missile, the PAC-3 missile. So we also have that. We totally agree on full integration and interoperability within NATO. Networking the systems together in NATO are critical so they can operate as one entity and one architecture. Patriot today is already integrated throughout all the NATO architectures in 5 different countries. It's the baseline of missile air defense today in NATO. So it's the standard of interoperability right now today. It continues to evolve. I think that aspect of network-centric and ensuring not only full network compatibility, but also full interoperability in the capability allows NATO members to share training, lessons learned, operational techniques, and make sure the defense design of all of NATO is integrated in a fashion that's very operationally effective.
Thank you, Mr. Alne.
Yes, interoperability and systems integration is of great importance, obviously. In NATO, I've been fortunate to be part of the process of developing guidelines and advice when it comes to interoperability and integration of ground-based air defense. For the NASAMS system, we have been for quite some time, for decades actually, very much focused on integration and interoperability. And we have made sure that our network-enabled NASAMS solution is interoperable with US systems and has done very well when it comes to integrating with NATO Europe solutions as well. But there is one thing that strikes us when we are doing work for NATO in integration and interoperability, and that is that it's not only about standards and implementing those standards, but it's very much about verification, certification that integration and interoperability really exist. And that is something that we have recommended to NATO again and again, that such a test and verification regime should be established as soon as possible, because that is really a key to achieving future interoperability and integration.
Thank you. Mr. Ruman, would you like to?
So from our point of view in the Polish Armaments Group, the situation is pretty simple. We have some strategic goals which were approved by our Ministry of Defense. And we are open to talk with all potential partners about cooperation that would fulfill those goals. So in every partnership, we seek a transfer of technology to Poland, Polonization of production, and providing a security of procurement and service for our armed forces. And every partner that is willing to cooperate with us in this way is more than welcome to cooperate with us. And the final choice always is on the side of the Ministry of Defense.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the audience? I see one over there, please.
Thank you very much. Adam Sowa, Military University of Technology. So about technology. Gentlemen, if you could elaborate on this. The obvious trend is that the effectors, the weapons, are becoming quicker and quicker. And there are also options to be closer and closer to the potential enemy. And on top of this, some nations adopt a doctrine of preemptive strike. So then the result of this is that we have less and less time to react. In the past, it was about hours or tens of minutes. Now it may be about minutes or fractions of minutes. And then from military point of view or decision-making processes, we need the man in the loop. But with time decreasing, there is more place for computers, for robots to react. How do you see this? Will we have the situation that computers will decide upon the reaction and maybe about the future wars? Could you elaborate on this?
The man in the loop, do we need him?
So I think that's a great question, and it's very important that, sir, that the individual is always needs to be in the loop, because you have to have that human interface. But I think what networking does and what technology does, it enables the systems to help the human make the best possible decision under extreme situations of pressure. These won't be easy decisions, but the faster that a system can help show that individual the options, what the best effector will be, because we talked about industry earlier, or industry and how to make these decisions. Can you tell if you're under a cyber attack, and what does that mean? So you have to have systems that are self-synchronizing, but the human will always be there. I think you also then have to have the capability to balance your defensive measures with your offensive measures. So when people look at precision strike capabilities such as HOMARs and other things, you have to have that and know that you can use that effectively to integrate across the battle space. Because it will be very complex, it will be very confusing, and it will be very demanding. But properly networked systems that are part of open architectures then help you self-synchronize and help present those options, the best possible options for the human to make the best possible decision under a very stressful situation.
So to add to my colleague's comments, I agree with that, but there's another aspect based on your question. In most today's battlefield systems of today and the future, they're already heavily computer integrated, so that the man in the loop, if you will, decision making is already assisted by computers from a information gathering point of view, an integration point of view, and a recommended optimum solution point of view, with the man making the final solution and decision, if you will, on which is, you know, go, no go, or changing the options. But the computer is already making optimum performance decisions so that it's a quicker response to the human, so he can make quicker, faster decisions.
Well, I think we all clearly see that part of the threat in the future will be mass attack when it's coming in the shorter ranges or in the longer ranges as one important tactic for overwhelming or suppressing the ground-based air defense. And we also know that if you go very automatic, if you have a very high level of automation, then you are vulnerable to depleting your effector arsenal. So you will always have to look for a fair balance between involving an operator and making the system very automatic. So that is a major challenge for us, and we have been working that for quite some time to find such a delicate balance. But we will always have to look at how the threat evolves in the future and quickly respond to that when it comes to this delicate balance.
So adding to what my colleagues already said, I think that all the systems are responsible for providing information and helping to take assisted decisions, but the decision will always be on the side of human beings. So whatever system will be there in the future, there always needs to be a procedure that will make sure that there is a person responsible for taking the decision when the potential attack happens. I cannot imagine myself a system that would take responsibility out of the person to take this decision.
If I could add, we always tend, sometimes in these forums we talk about how to make the decision, but because what you don't want is you don't want a miscalculation. And the miscalculation in these times can be a graver decision than a correct decision sometimes, whether it be political, strategic, or operational. So that computer system giving us that information is very, very valuable to the human making the decision.
Thank you. I think Mr. Nolte touched on a very important subject that I want to ask you about next, and it's the fact that any point air defense system could be overwhelmed with enough missiles. We just can't afford to have as many counter missiles as our enemy does of its attack missiles. So with that being said, maybe it's more of a policy kind of question, but I am wondering about your opinion on this. What is the point of missile defense? Being short range or medium range, why do we really need it if we know that, you know, at the end they can still bomb us? Mr. Baird?
I'll start with, yeah, sure. Because it goes back to that cost equation. There has to be a penalty for first strike or limited strike or whatever you want to call it, the first attack. And you have to be able to defend yourself enough on that first attack so that you can have your offensive weapons basically deter the rest. So if you look at it, there's a cost balancing equation, and it's a I'll call it a security political question on what that's worth and how much of that you invest in different ways, which goes to the balance cost equation I mentioned earlier. But if you don't have some type of missile defense balanced with an air defense capability that balances across the multi-dimensional spectrum of what the offensive force could attack you with, they're going to find your weakness and go after it. So you need a balanced approach. If you don't have an air missile defense system, that's where they're going to attack. I mean, it's simple as that. So if you don't have it, you're vulnerable to everything else that he could do to you.
I agree. You know, and we could have another policy discussion after this on a whole other panel just on that subject of that balance. Right. But you have to have missile defense for a variety of reasons. I think, first of all, strategically, a nation needs to have their infrastructure and their key capabilities protected, and they have to have that deterrence capability across various threats. The second piece is you need it operationally and tactically because if you are engaged in some type of operation, you have to protect your offensive forces as well. Yes, anybody is susceptible to overwhelming missile attack, overwhelming air attack, overwhelming cyber attack, any one of these things. So it's the balance across the force that you have to have. But this is a fundamental block of any type of, whether it be national or operational defense, that you have to have. And there's capabilities when you start looking at complex threats that you have to have in a system to handle those. And I think we've all talked about it before, this networking capability, before networking sensors together in an open architecture so you can maximize effectiveness of weapon systems. Getting the most out of everything you have at the critical time is absolutely important.
Mr. Nolte?
I think that is one thing to think about, I think, is that when we have seen NATO moving lately from mostly out-of-area operations into what is more and more homeland defense, we see that there is also a growing respect for the importance of ground-based air defense to defend your infrastructure. It should cost a lot to overwhelm and to suppress and to destroy the infrastructure of any member state of NATO. So ground-based air defense is growing in importance, I think. But one important thing to think about when we are discussing here the battlefield of the future as a headline for this panel discussion is that ground-based air defense needs to be able to survive to operate. It will be challenged in the broad spectrum threat situation with anything from special operations forces to TBM attacks and all that is between those ends of the spectrum. So we need to make sure that we can survive, and that calls for a lot of important use of technology in order to make sure that we can be resilient, we can survive attack through, for example, distributed architectures, distributed deployments, so that we are able to survive even the most dense type of mass attack, for example.
Yes, adding to what was said here, I agree that the missile and air defense system only makes sense when combined with some offensive capabilities. And as Poland, I think we need to rely on our allies to some extent with those offensive capabilities. But just a quick addition that I think that actually cyber offensive capabilities may be something which for Polish armed forces may be one of the things that we can develop and really excel in the future.
Great, thank you. Any more questions from the audience? The last one sparked an interesting discussion. If not, maybe we can shift gears to what Mr. Ruman just said. The offense-defense mix, that seems to be a pretty important part of the future battlefield. We've talked much about air defense, but I know all of the companies present here, they have a great portfolio of offensive weapons, from missiles to cyber attacks to anything else. So what, in your opinion, and maybe we'll start with Mr. Arne, what's the place of an offensive weapon in a defensive kind of strategy, for example, for Poland or for other NATO allies?
Well, it's quite a complex question, and I'm not sure how to deal with that. But sometimes we are interested in looking into how a certain type of defensive capability can have multiple use. And it's sometimes clear to see that basically a defensive system can have also an offensive use depending on the character of effectors, for example. And that is something that is quite clear in some instances. If we move a little bit aside from ground-based air defense, for example, and look into network-enabled capabilities for, such as here in Poland, the coastal defense system, you see that the infrastructure that is part of the coastal defense solution is actually originating from ground-based air defense. So you have immediately a dual use. And so there is a link between the capabilities of a defensive system and an offensive system, obviously, when it comes to the technical solution and so on. But how that will pan out and work in the operational field, that is always a question.
Thank you. Let me twist this question a little bit and shift it to Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. The Aegis Ashore base is being built right now. It has the SM3 missiles, and it's a Lockheed Martin design system, if I'm not mistaken.
With Raytheon missiles.
Yes, Raytheon missiles, absolutely. And we hear our colleagues from the East telling us it's a threat to Russia, and it's a provocation, and they see it as an offensive weapon. What's your take on this in particular? We know the Spy 1 has significant capabilities. Okay, I'll give the floor to you. Yes, please.
I will start, but I'm going to caveat this. As part of industry, we want to not comment our opinions on politics and geopolitical issues, so we don't want to get too far away from there.
As a moderator, I need to pull your tongue. So.
I got that, so when you look at the comment about most defensive systems have an offensive tint to them, sometimes the difference between offense and defense can be the geography of where the targeting happens. If the missiles go further than and it crosses borders, then it's attacking. I will say categorically, the Aegis Ashore site is a defensive system. It's really targeted somewhere else, and that's all I can say about it. I think what Russia is doing is posturing on the change that it makes to the balance of the equation as they see it. If it's a very capable defensive system for missile defense, which it is, it takes away some of the attack options that Russia might think they have, which is why they push and say it makes an imbalance in the equation of today. To me, that's really what their statement's making. And the political argument is, does it really do that or not, or does it just add protection layer to the NATO European forces?
No, so I agree with my colleague. Most of these are really policy, government decisions, not proper for industry to comment on. But I would like to talk about innovation, because I think it goes back to earlier discussions that we had. And I think what you see with a site like Aegis Ashore is innovative capabilities of how industry, coming back to your theme of the morning, how do you see the future battle space? Industry is able to provide innovation by capitalizing on other things that were developed, looking to the future, and then providing those innovative solutions to whatever nation or whatever other, whatever nations like NATO or nations like Poland, how they want to apply those innovative solutions for their common defense. And I think that's something where industry can help shape the future battlefields.
Great, thank you. Gentlemen? No. Any questions from the audience? No, then I will continue Aegis Ashore, because I'm very interested in the subject. And stemming away from, say, the policy side of this topic.
Please.
We know that Aegis system that's installed on the BMD frigates and destroyers has the SM2s and the SM6s as well, which gives it a short-range air defense capability, as well as terminal ballistic missile defense. I'm not asking if it should, but is it technically feasible to add this capability to Redzikovo and the Vasul, the Aegis Ashore sites?
Yeah, I think you have to be careful here again, because these are policy decisions on the purposes of the sites, which is not proper for us to comment on. But I would only, without repeating myself, I mean, industry can do a lot of things. The question is, what do you want it to do? What are the requirements? And then, as our colleagues have pointed out too, is how do you integrate it? How do you synchronize it? And how do you, what's the cost of doing that? And does that meet the needs of whatever country or organization or country or nation wants to have that capability? I know it's not direct answer to your question, but I think it's better that we stay away from that.
Would you like me to add to that? So I'll add two things. First of all, you're part of the first part of the question, the comment. Yes, those missile systems are part of the naval capability that is integrated into the Aegis type class system. Obviously, the ship-based system architecture can accommodate the multiple types of missiles for different missions. So technically, I agree with my colleague, it's feasible to do that for that system. I can't comment on the exact architecture that's being installed, though, because I think that is a policy and a government-to-government discussion about what exactly is being deployed and installed there.
Just this word, the feasibility, that's I think, reassuring to a lot of people who are following this subject here in Poland.
You know, industry reaches out there. Technically, almost anything is possible, given time, money, and will.
That's true. That's true. Any other questions, maybe, from the audience? No? How are we doing with the time here? Well, we're right on time. It's 15 past. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for joining me in this panel. Please join me in thanking our guests.